And there really hasn't been enough work on this. Now, one of the comments that we just had was about the idea of, well, we don't know a great deal about these things and it's all unproven and so forth. And the answer is yes, we don't know a lot about this. We do need to do more. But if we think about the evidence of what we know about the human body, there is absolutely no doubt that this stuff works. It's just a question of how and how much. What can we do with it? Because in everybody's body, there is a system called the endocannabinoid system, which has been criminally understudied even at medical schools. Okay? And its basic idea is that it works at the interface of various other systems in the body, and its main idea is to promote homeostasis. So this is where, for example, you can see why CBD, for example, is very good at things like stopping seizures, and why cannabinoids are used for people who have PTSD and so forth. So they're found in various different organisms and organs, and they minimize the pain and damage, for example, caused by injury. They have a number of other really interesting things that they do. Okay, so we're talking about the nervous system, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the immune system, and we're talking about the endocannabinoid system sort of binding everything together. This is not something when I was doing biology that I would have learned about. You have a question?
Does this work hand in hand with our internal opioid system, or are they working in completely different ways?
I think it depends on the receptors and stuff. The endocannabinoid system has its own receptors. So it depends where the opioid molecules actually bind. And I'm not an expert on that. I have to put my hand up and say that. What I do know is that cannabinoids bind to specific receptors, and we'll talk about those in just a second. Okay? So, but this is also where we'll talk about the entourage effect as well, where we can understand that. So let's go on and do this. This will start to answer maybe some of your questions. So the endocannabinoid system, there's a couple of really nice slides here, which I didn't make myself, but I show every year because they're so beautiful. And this is one of them, okay? So there are a number of different receptors that act in the endocannabinoid system that are bound by various different endocannabinoids, and also, obviously, the phytocannabinoids. So we'll make a distinction here. The endocannabinoids are the ones that your body has naturally. Phytocannabinoids are the ones that the plant makes that we add in, that can be new medicines. So the two main ones, they're not the only ones, the two main receptors are the CB1 receptor, and that's found mostly in your brain. That's where THC binds. So that's one of the reasons, presumably, why THC is psychotropic. There's also the CB2 receptor, which is found in various different parts of your body. Now, what's interesting is there is a tie-in here between endocannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, and your nervous system. And I'll show you that in just a moment, okay? Because it makes it possible to understand a little bit about what's actually happening and why these things can work, okay? I'm not really going to say much about this. I show this slide every year because it's just so beautiful. It's just so nice, okay? CB1 in the brain, CB2 mostly found within the immune system. Right, so this is what I was leading up to. This is why I'm convinced that cannabinoids will work as medicines, okay? Because we can understand a bit about this, okay? Here's your CB1 receptor, and it's found at synapses, okay? Now, in the normal course of events, your endogenous cannabinoid, something like anandamide, which is a neurotransmitter thing, here, binds to the CB1 receptor. THC has a very similar molecular shape to anandamide and binds to the same receptor. So what it means is the reason why cannabis sativa is so incredible as a potential source of medicine is it makes a decent amount of chemicals which just happen to have the same shape as these molecules in your own body. So it's relatively similar to anandamide. There are other plants that do make a certain amount of cannabinoids, but nothing like the amount that cannabis makes, okay? So this is why this works. This is why we can be certain that they can be the sources of new medicines, because that's their target. Okay? THC targets that. We have a molecular mechanism. We just don't know yet how well it will work as a medicine. Okay, so there are other receptors. So this goes back to your question, okay? And I'm not sure in the human body, because I'm not an animal scientist, exactly what normally binds to all of these. But you can see there are various different receptors, and the different cannabinoids will bind to different ones. So this is also important when we're talking about how to make medicines and why some of the old wives' tales that come out of the old people who've been taking medicinal cannabis for years, why they talk about certain things. And I'm going to talk about it now. So here's an idea, okay? So THC binds to this receptor, CBN binds to this one, CBG binds to that one, CBC binds to that one. Okay, you've already got 4 active molecules in potentially one plant. CBD, they're not quite sure exactly where it binds, but it does something. Okay, 5 different ones. Now, I've heard a lot more people arguing about this than I really would want to, because what they talk about, and if you looked on things like LinkedIn or you go to conferences, they will argue about something called the entourage effect, which comes from the people who smoke cannabis, and they will say that there is a whole lot more effect when you have more than one cannabinoid in a complex mixture than if you just take something like CBD alone. And others will argue about it, and it just gets complicated. And the answer is, of course it bloody works better. I mean, the analogy I always use is this. If you imagine, say, THC binding to one receptor is playing one note on a piano keyboard. CBN is another note. So if you have a complex mixture, you're playing a chord, not a single note. This is why the entourage effect is real. And this is why the best medicines based on cannabinoids might well not contain a single cannabinoid, but a mixture of them. Also explains why we need to look at the rare ones. So that's the reason. So what's nice about this is not old wives' tales sitting around a campfire and all this stuff. This is based on actual molecular biology.